Howdy! How you doing out there? Well, things have not gone as scheduled, or things have not gone quite as well as they had been scheduled. And so we hit a little snag over the last day or so. In fact, we kind of hit a couple of little snags. I had promised to you guys via the scheduling and everything my Halloween era review of Godzilla versus Biollante. And when that premiered last night at midnight, it did so without audio. So I got to sit down, and it wasn't the only one. There was one other video that did not have audio that was going to premiere this weekend, and that was a no-show. So basically, what I'm going to have to do is sit down and try to recapture the magic, such as it were. So I am going to try to do what I did before to a greater or lesser degree. And when you end up having to do repairs like this, you have the home field advantage of maybe I can do it better this time around. Well, let's see. We'll find out. Okay, so boy, 1989 Godzilla vs. Biollante came out. I'm thinking, and I could be wrong, I'm thinking it was actually produced in 87, but I could be dead wrong on that. But it came out stateside, I think, in 89. Didn't do much business. And I think, in all honesty, Toho had decided that they were going to stop relying on us Yanks after a while. They kind of tried the big comeback with Return of Godzilla, aka Godzilla 1985. And I don't think it made much of a splash. But, so this Godzilla 1985 is technically kind of the beginning of the Heisei Series, but it's kind of a somewhat different animal. Whereas there's a cohesion from Godzilla vs. Biollante up through Godzilla vs. Destroyer or Destroyer, which, all things considered, I think that's 5 or 6 movies. I think on the whole that was 7 movies. I think. Don't quote me. But I thought it was a fairly cohesive setup from that right up to the end in 1995. But I'm not here to banter chronology. That's, other folks have that shtick and they do it well. It's kind of not my bag. This was kind of a wing-ding wang-doodle. It was just kind of like, wow, okay, this is not your daddy's Godzilla anymore. It picks up in the immediate aftermath of Godzilla 1985, Return of Godzilla, and Godzilla has been dropped in a big volcano, and I think they've kind of done geology tests and find out that, yeah, he's actually alive down there in the lava. But meanwhile, he has ravaged Tokyo and, left just shreds of his skin all over buildings. And an interesting phenomenon kind of breaks out as people with the government or whatever, military, are running around just collecting bits of his skin, bits of these Godzilla cells. And this becomes kind of a factor throughout, I think, much of the Heisei series. It kind of all involves the Godzilla cells somehow and where they can go and what can be done with them and what can happen to them. And the interesting factor that really breaks into Godzilla versus Biollante is suddenly there's a big bio war. There's a big biotech war for these cells. In fact, they have some fictional Arabian country trying to get a hold of these, and they've got agents and they're committing all kinds of espionage and subterfuge and murder. And then you've got this other group who are an American group, I think called Biomajor or something like that, and they're running around doing the same thing. And it's the beginning of a theme that you see in several movies in this series where the Americans are very much in play, but they're not necessarily the good guys. And it's kind of like, wow, okay, well, we don't have to rely on the Americans to be our big buddies anymore, basically because they tried to put their movie out in their country and it didn't do terribly well, and so they're kind of writing us off. So, the floodgates are open, so to speak. Anyway, kind of a really interesting thing. I found it fascinating. I found it really kind of a cool slant that we Americans don't always get to see. And yeah, this was not a big hit in the U.S. either, and it was kind of really a direct-to-video thing. And I personally did not catch up to the Heisei series until mid to late 90s when I moved down here to Arkansas, and I found out there was a whole underground that were trading these VHS tapes. It was technically like a rental system, but the rental system was, well, basically, you pay us $1 and we'll ship it to you or whatever, and it wound up working pretty well. And I had all these movies on VHS before they were ever marketed here in the States, and so that was a really cool thing. Thank God for underground. Thank God for the underground system, right? That's my attitude anyway. So, Godzilla vs. Biollante kind of hit me in the face with just how good it is. I mean, it's crazy good, crazy enjoyable, crazy captivating. The plot, well, I think I just gave you the big setup there. Okay, so the plot has this country, I think it's the country of Saradia, which is the fictional Arab country that have the spy going around, killing everybody and trying to get the G cells. Dr. Shiragami, who's one of the main heroes of the story, goes to Saradia on their dime and is helping them to genetically engineer with these G cells and genetically engineer vegetation and basically turn this country from a desert into kind of a paradise with lots of great new agriculture and everything. Their lab gets bombed, possibly by the Americans, maybe by someone else, I'm not sure. But their lab gets bombed. His daughter Erica is killed. Shiragami returns to Japan a broken man and starts conducting all kinds of weird, unorthodox experiments with plant life, and is kind of mixing the G cells with flowers, seeing what he can come up with, seeing what that can turn into. And he's also kind of got his daughter Erica's cells in there, and he's kind of playing around with them. Yeah, if you haven't guessed by this point, it's kind of a Frankenstein story. Kind of a Frankenstein story, but with really, in a lot of ways, a highly sympathetic Frankenstein. As all this is kind of happening, the company, or the, I guess, government / military, paramilitary organization, G-Force, has kind of formed as kind of a Godzilla task force, because one of these days he's going to bust out of that volcano and then all hell's going to break loose. So they have so they have a group of the characters and stars and whatnot kind of scrambling around, dealing with Dr. Shiragami and trying to see where he's going with this research. But at the same time, they've got their fingers in some other pies. They have this one little psychic woman named Miki Sagusa, who's played by Megumi Yodaka, and she's the character. She's kind of like the through character through the entire Heisei series. The great thing about the Heisei series is, yeah, there is some loose continuity in a lot of the Showa series. With the Heisei series, there's kind of a through line throughout the entire series of like 7 movies or whatever it is, and this girl is it. And you kind of follow her, and she goes through kind of a series of character developments and kind of an arc. So there's just kind of like this continuity to those movies. And she is kind of trying to play mentally with the cells, but those are all, and whatever his research is, trying to connect psychically with these flowers. Hey, government research and development, right, folks? Anyway, so also on the side of this, they're also doing these psychic experiments on kids, little kids. It's like they've almost got like this kindergarten class full of these little kids who they're trying to get to some kind of an experiment to kind of tell them stuff. At one point, they all start drawing these pictures. They all start coloring these pictures and whatnot. And Mickey and one of the other characters kind of go to the school and say, "Kids, let's see what you're all drawing." And they all go, "Yay!" And they hold up these signs. They hold up these pictures, and it's all Godzilla destroying stuff. And I was like, "Oh boy, oh that's not good." And later on, one of these groups of bioterrorists, well, they do a number of things. First of all, they try breaking into Dr. Shiragami's lab, and they got more than they bargained for, because these plants or these vines all start attacking them and killing them and tearing them up. And either they die or they barely escape with their lives. It's been a couple of years at this point, but that is the plant that will eventually turn into Biollante, and I'll get to that. The other thing that all these bioterrorists do is they decide to maybe put Japan in the hot seat by blowing off some bombs in that volcano. And of course, presto, Godzilla comes jumping out, and he's storming into the city, destroying everything. And so it's kind of like, what are we going to do? And so this giant mutant rose in Dr. Shiragami's lab freaks out and hightails it. And it goes to pretty much the lake area where Godzilla is turning up. And it turns up and gets in a skirmish with him. And so it's explained in kind of a convoluted way that this giant monster rose is called Biollante, and that it's infused with the spirit of this old Norse goddess that I'm personally convinced doesn't exist at all. Was never any kind of character in the Norse pantheon. That's just something they kind of pulled out of their butts. And it's constructed of, just rose and Godzilla cells. And naturally it is attuned to Godzilla and wants to fight with him. And it's also infused with the doctor's daughter for some reason. Yeah, she's in there somewhere. And there's several attempts throughout the whole thing to stop Godzilla or corral Godzilla. And if you've seen enough of these Japanese monster movies, they all kind of follow an arc. The army's got to try to stop the monster 3 or 4 different ways. Most of them don't work. And then Biollante keeps getting wiped out and then coming back in some other weird configuration. And, by the end, it's like towering over Godzilla, and it's big and scary, and it's, eating Godzilla's head and doing all this stuff. And I'm not going to, spoil the ending. The ending is actually pretty cool. It's kind of in keeping with the whole Frankenstein myth, but at the same time, it kind of packs sort of an emotional heaviness to it and kind of profundity. It's not often you can throw the word profundity in with a Godzilla flick. You maybe would have to go back to the original Godzilla, maybe Mothra versus Godzilla in the early 60s. Up to this point, that's about it. But so this one actually does get kind of heavy. And it's like you watch it and you're just like, wow. Well, that was pretty cool. And the Heisei series on the whole, kind of does that to you. Not all of them are equal. I would say there are a few that are absolute knockdown, drag out ones, and this is one of them. Now I might have to talk about some of those other ones later on, but tell you what, this is really good. You were really officially introduced to the Heisei Godzilla suits, and the suits in the Heisei series look really, really good. They kind of build on the way he looked in the first movie, but they kind of streamline it and define it in such a way. It's almost because he's got this little muzzle and he's got these little pointy ears. As like my wife so succinctly pointed out to me, he looks like a kitty cat. I was like, yeah, he does look like a kitty cat. There's almost kind of like this adorable kind of kitty catness of this big lizard. I don't know. It just kind of an engaging sense of personality. The suits are important. Is like the suits and the puppets, the puppetronics and all that in the first movie looked real good. They were real good for what it was as an introduction to this monster. Second movie, Godzilla Raids Again, it looks a little more jankety. King Kong vs. Godzilla, it just looks kind of silly. Probably looks more appropriate. It looks like a big lizard, but kind of silly, kind of goofy looking. And Kong also really goofy looking. Godzilla vs. Mothra, they find this nice kind of thing where the muzzle is kind of wiggly and rubbery at the same time. It looks really malevolent. Yeah, the suits are really important. The rubber suits are really important. It's like when you get into like the South Seas the so-called South Seas trilogy in the mid to late 60s. The suits are utter dog shit by then. They just look stupid. Toward the end of the Showa series, they kind of start picking up and looking good. And, but going forward, there are lots of good ideas being used throughout. The Heisei series all kind of has one uniform look, and I like the one uniform look. Anyway, fun characters. You get the character of Mickey introduced for the first time. She doesn't do a lot. She becomes a lot more important as the series goes on. You get this great character in Colonel Gondo, who's kind of a great kind of wisecracking commando guy, and ends up, kind of doing some daredevil stuff, and he ends up He ends up basically unfortunately getting killed for his trouble, and that has repercussions several movies down the line. Godzilla versus Space Godzilla, which in my opinion is probably the worst of the Heisei series, but there's a character that gets introduced who is also part of kind of a through line with Colonel Gondo. And he's like Colonel Gondo's best friend, who's almost like in a Captain Ahab mission. And he's the best part of that movie. But, just blah, blah, blah. Godzilla versus Biollante is, at least in my opinion, one of the better Godzilla movies. And yeah, happy Halloween, folks. I recommend that one highly.